As I was saying, people who have been schooled in hegemonic ideas do not cause trouble. Right? I'm sorry, there was some kind of glitch. The webcam froze, but in any case, people who have been schooled and schooled in hegemonic ideas do not cause trouble. People who have been educated, by contrast, are those who can question, are those who don't accept the given as natural and normal necessarily, who are able to examine the way society operates from different perspectives, who are alive to the possibility of self-interest getting in the way of justice, who are able to demand accounts of why things are the way they are. So in a school institution, these two opposed tendencies collide. On the one hand, there is the social requirement to produce compliant citizens who do what is expected of them. On the other hand, there is the educational demand to produce citizens who can think for themselves. But beyond that, we get into a different level of discussion of what freedom of thinking means and what it involves. And so we get into a conversation about freedom of thought and the way in which thinking, as I put it in a kind of Hegelian way, negates the independence of the objective world. When I say it negates the independence of the objective world, I don't mean that human thinking has the power to change reality simply by thinking about it differently. Quite the contrary. What I mean, rather, is that when we think about a problem, when we think about the natural world, when we think about social institutions, right, they cease to be absolutely independent objects. Right? We don't acquire a power over them as material things, but we acquire the power to investigate them critically. So we can try and understand how nature works. We can try and understand how social institutions came to be. We can ask whose interests they serve. So education is essential to developing the power of thinking. And the power of thinking is essential to understanding the process by which different realities come to be. If we accept reality just as it's given, or better said, if we accept reality as something given, then we have to constantly adapt to it. We can't change it. We become objects and not subjects, as Freire might have said. But when we understand that what we think about is not some fixed and given reality out there, but an idea that we develop, then we can come to understand ourselves as agents or subjects. We have helped make the world the way it is. We can change it if it is found to be problematic in one or more ways. Now, we emphasize again in a couple of places that we do not regard critical thinking. We do not regard the critical implications of becoming educated as in any way associated or reducible to teaching people some specific political content. Right? That is not education as a practice of cognitive freedom. Instead, we have to discover why problems are problems. Educated people don't need to be told what to think. They can think. That's the very nature of becoming educated. And therefore, they can discover social problems on their own. They can discover what is unjust by learning what human beings are, what their potentialities are, what problematic forms of justification of oppression are. You don't have to teach educated people what oppression is. They'll discover it for themselves once they have learned to explore a problem comprehensively. Now, from the standpoint of the hegemonic ideas, or the ruling powers who want to instill hegemonic ideas, education is a problem. Because educated people don't do what they're told. They do what there is good reason to do, but not what they are told. Now, what are we told to do? Hence, we come back to the importance of the tyranny of work. We are told that the essential goal in life is to find paid employment. We are told that finding paid employment is tantamount to becoming a useful, valuable, contributing member of society. But what's really going on here is that we are being schooled to insert ourselves without question into an economy that turns our labor into profit. A small portion of that profit is given back to us as wages, but we're not taught to see the coercive aspect of this. The coercive aspect is not necessarily what we do when we work. This brings me to the point we discuss in the third section, the difference between non-alienated and alienated work. Alienated work is work as structured in the capitalist economy. And it's alienated because it's not under our control. It is primarily for the profit it produces. Right? People are laid off if there's no profit to be made, as millions and millions of people are finding out. Because nobody can open their stores or run their factories, there's no need for labor. The people still need it. Right? We still need people to be working in many respects, but the capitalist doesn't need it. And so there are layoffs until such a time as there is profit to be made. But the content of the work we do, whether as doctors or nurses or educators, that still is a human requirement. So when we talk about the tyranny of work, we're not saying that it's tyrannical to have to do anything. Our work is essentially life valuable, as we talked about when we were looking at my first essay. Education, too, can be understood in this way. Schooling is alienated education. It's education subordinated to the purposes of social reproduction. It's education subordinated to the purposes of capitalist industries. It's education alienated under the demands of political powers who want schools to produce job-ready candidates. But the work of education, learning how to read, learning basic numeracy skills, learning how to question, learning how to communicate, learning how to argue, learning how to listen, learning how to consider things from a different perspective, that's a vital form of human capacity. Essentially important and non-alienated. It's work, right? As all of you well know, writing an essay, coming to class, arguing with another, reading books, whatever it is we do, attending labs, all of that is work, right? We are externalizing our capacities and producing something which hopefully has life value. So, Corral and I don't reject institutionalized education. We recognize educational institutions as alienating, as contradictory, but our job as students, as teachers and students, is to try and resolve that contradiction as far as possible in favor of the educational mission of the schools. So, if we reject the neoliberal model of schooling, we don't have to reject schools. If we argue that the primary purpose of education is to develop people's capacities to think for themselves, to think freely, we don't reject that education can also translate into forms of non-alienated work. Of course, people want to become and have to become and ought to become valued and valuable contributing members of the society. But they also have to be asking questions about whether this society operates as it should. Is this society adequate to its values and ideas? For that, we need educated human beings. For that, we need people who can ask questions. If we all think of ourselves only as doing a job, only as here to get a job or to get paid in my case, then the educational function of the schools will be lost. And if that's the case, I don't think we will even get social reproduction. People have to be able to think beyond the demands of the immediate context. Look at the situation we're in now. In some respects, it's unprecedented. In other respects, we might have been better prepared. But forget about that for a second. If we don't have people who can think creatively, then how can we solve the problem? Obviously, we can't just keep doing what we were doing, otherwise we wouldn't be in the problem that we're in. So you don't have to become a Freirean defender of the pedagogy of the oppressed to understand the importance of genuine education, of the cultivation of the capacity to think clearly for ourselves. Our ability to creatively respond to any kind of problem depends upon that capacity, and it's only education, never schooling, that develops it. Thanks.